We were out at a swamp in the North Island, and it's an area of swamp at the south end of Lake Taupo, and we're just walking along and we heard sort of boom, boom, boom.
There are birds that are more often heard than seen. This is the call of one such rare New Zealand bird, Matuku Hūrepo, the Australasian bittern. The bitterns are partially nocturnal, and only the male bitterns use this boom call during the breeding season to attract females. And the birds are so rare that it's very special to even just hear one calling.
First time I've heard the bittern call in the wild, so that was quite exciting. But the more exciting bit was walking down through the swamp. I was looking to see if I could see anything feeding around the edges of the raupo, and then woof! Up flew a bittern about 10 metres away. It's a heron, a very heavy heron, long neck, very strong bill. Yeah, not a fine bill, but a very sharp, dagger-like looking bill, and it flew off over the swamp.
This is Mary Thompson. She is an ornithologist, someone who studies birds and loves watching birds.
I don't know why I like watching birds, I just do.
She's a member of Birds New Zealand, and she tells me that in all these years watching birds, she's only seen 3 bitterns until this summer.
Seeing a bittern is really hard. They live in the depths of wetlands within the raupo swamps mainly, and occasionally they'll be seen out in a wet paddock or ditch if you're very, very lucky. But if they're living in a swamp, you would never know unless you spent hours and hours watching and seeing if a bird flew up to fly to another area, and that might happen once a day or every few days. We also can't see them because they look like reeds. Their coloration is sort of buff and brown striped, vertical stripes, so when they stand still and upright in the reeds, they just look like reeds. And it's only when they fly do you see them, and they very rarely fly. The hard task we've got is trying to find birds that you can't see easily.
Mary is part of a collaborative project in the Otago region surveying wetlands to try and detect bitterns and other cryptic birds using sound.
You can stand out at night yourself in a swamp and listen for the booms, and that's a very cold and miserable job. So the development of the technology of having an acoustic recorder makes the job easier in a sense.
My name is Karthik, and this is Tune Into Nature, a podcast bringing you sounds and stories from the wild. We journey through Aotearoa, New Zealand's wild places to meet unique wildlife and hear from the people working to protect them. I hope these stories will inspire you to enjoy nature in your own way.
Working in collaboration with Birds and Zed, Forest and Bird, and the University of Otago, we started monitoring wetland bird species, specifically Australasian Bittern, Matuku Hūrepo, spotless crake, pueto, and marsh crake, kotoreki.
This is Dr. Scott Jarvie. He's a terrestrial ecologist with the ORC, the Otago Regional Council. The project to monitor cryptic wetland birds around Otago is planned for 5 years and is currently in its second year. The team is using acoustic recorders to capture sounds of the wetland birds, like the boom call of the bittern.
The work has been enabled by the ORC purchasing acoustic recording devices, and through Birds and Zed, Forest and Bird, and others, them deploying them in wetlands around the region.
Australasian bitterns are only found in Australia, New Caledonia, and in Aotearoa, New Zealand. And they were once widespread around New Zealand. For example, there's an historical observation from the early 1900s that bitterns were very common in the swamps in the Tiree area in Otago. But since the 1900s, their numbers have been in a steady decline. This is due to the draining of the wetlands and swamps like in Tiree, where the bitterns feed and nest. To give a bigger picture, the country has lost 90% of its wetland area in the last 100 years, mostly due to draining for farming. And today, the bitterns are rare in the Tiree wetlands.
There certainly would have been a lot more bittern when the whole of the Tiree was a swamp. So the clearing of swamps means there's 10% of their habitats left. Our estimates of bittern in New Zealand will be a max of 1,000 birds.
In New Zealand, Australasian bitterns are classified as nationally critical, one of the species that's facing an immediate risk of extinction. So, the acoustic monitoring project will help understand more about these endangered birds in Otago.
Bitterns often boom from the same place in the wetland. They may even make a platform of reeds to boom from, and so that will be within their territory. So then we can say this is one bittern territory. Or if we get booms coming from another direction, then it's another bittern. So that's a sort of a refinement of the whole thing, to actually turn the bittern boom calls into how many bitterns are there and where are they.
The bitterns need wetlands with tall, dense vegetation.
They need an area where they can fish and a raupo area where they can have nests to breed hidden it completely. So we're picking bigger areas. So we think they need at least 20 hectares, 30 hectares of swamp for their territory. They don't want the water too deep because their legs aren't enormously long. They're about 30 centimetres long, so they don't want water deeper than that. This year we've been focusing on sort of coastal Otago and also the wetlands around Queenstown area. So we've been trying to home in on those areas where we think bittern might live and where people have said, I think I've seen a bittern there.
And one of those places where the bittern has been spotted is in the coastal Tautuku wetlands in the Catlins area. The team has put out acoustic recorders in the wetlands, and I tag along with forest and bird rangers Francesca and Petra when they're heading out to get the devices back.
We're on our way through this beautiful forest, heading to the mouth of the Tautuku estuary, which is where we've got Matuku Hūrepo Bittern, Australasian Bittern monitors placed at 3 sites along this estuary, and this is just one of our access ways.
This is Francesca Cunninghame. Franny has been working on bird conservation projects around the world, and in New Zealand she works with Forest and Bird. She is the manager for the Tautuku Restoration Project. So part of her job is to walk all day in the Tautuku forest doing native bird surveys or working on predator control.
On our rodent tracking tunnel loop and our lower loop, we have a tracking tunnel line in the wetland, and then we have to traverse the remainder of the wetland to get to our next tracking tunnel line, and that's where there's quite a deep muddy channel on one side, and I missed my footing, fell in, was on my back like an upside down hoo-hoo beetle, with my sort of pack in the mud and my legs in the mud, and I was feeling a bit sorry for myself when there's a big rustle from the other side of the bushes and another bittern flies up, circles right over me. I'm still stuck in the mud, and off it goes, and then I was delighted and quite happy to be stuck in the mud because, it was my second bittern sighting, so pretty special.
I'm usually up in the wetlands or up on the ridges with riflemen in the wetlands with the fern birds.
This is Petra Simpson from Forest and Bird.
So we only do this like 3 times. So once to put out the monitor, once to change the batteries, and then finally to collect them in. Yeah, so it's always nice to come down here.
The bitterns, have you seen one and heard one in your experiences with them?
No, I have never seen or heard one. I would love to. They seem to me like this mysterious bird that I actually don't really know much about, but that's what intrigues me about them. Hopefully someday soon I will.
On the walk, I could see lush native trees all around, and Franny tells me that this forest is pretty unique in New Zealand as it was never logged. So the forest has got some old native trees like Rimu, Miro and Southern Drata.
And this year that's all coming into bud, so if we were back here in about 3 weeks, you'd have the red flowering Southern Rata right out to behind the beach.
As we walk closer to the coast, the vegetation changes from native trees to tall dense grass and reeds. And we get to the spot where one of the recording devices is mounted.
It's an acoustic recorder.
Yep.
These ones are made here in New Zealand by the Department of Conservation electronics team. And basically what they are is they're the ears that we can leave out in the field for weeks at a time, for as long as the batteries last, which do the listening for us. It's a long, pretty much enclosed black plastic tube with a microphone head at the bottom, and that's protected inside a wire cage. And you hang them vertically. They're designed to withstand the elements. They are waterproof when they're all set. And then we literally just tie those nicely.
And this particular recorder was mounted on the branch of a manuka tree.
I think Gavin tied this one on, and luckily for us, Gavin is approaching 2 metres tall, and occasionally we get to monitors he's tied up, and Petra and myself have a bit of a mission reaching the knots. But we're lucky here because it's only at about my head height, which is about 160 centimetres above the ground, sort of at the top of this oi jointed rush, which is the predominant habitat at this site.
To get to the other monitoring locations, we walk through dense oi reeds, which look like tall brownish grass. And while we were on the mud flats, I paused where the mud was soft and got stuck. There was mud up to my calves and I had to dig myself out while Petra helped with my gear.
You know, this is an interesting wetland, and it's really special because it is a saltwater estuarine wetland that's still bounded by native forest. Thick, sort of reedy wetland vegetation, wet underfoot, muddy. You get stuck in the mud. On our wetland survey last weekend, one of our team members, got stuck in the mud sufficiently that he actually had to call for help to get out. That's the nature of the kind of habitat that these birds are living in. So they're not places that humans necessarily spend much time. So they're going undetected. In many ways, I guess the hard work begins. We've done the easy part, which was getting them out, coming after a couple of weeks to replace the batteries, and now returning at the end of the season to bring the monitor in.
The acoustic recorders are programmed to record sounds for 3 hours at dawn and dusk, and they will record all environmental sounds. So the challenge for the team is to go through hundreds of hours of audio and identify the bittern boom call, among other sounds.
What happens with those is we convert the sound recordings into spectrograms.
A spectrogram is a visual representation of an audio signal, and it shows the frequencies that make up the sound and how they change over time.
It's a graph, but how do you describe that? Frequency is up one side and time the other. So every time there's a sound, if it's a high frequency, you get a mark high up. And if it's a low frequency, you get a mark low down. And so a chirruping bird like a blackbird song would have marks all the way down, making a pattern. And if you're very clever, you could tell that was a blackbird's pattern. And what you're looking for is right down the bottom at 150 hertz, where hardly anybody sings, 3 little bars, like a barcode. And then in another minute, you'll see another 3, like a barcode.
The sequence of booms is called a boom train, and all the boom sounds will be below 200 Hz. So on the spectrogram, the team can ignore other sounds above that level.
Occasionally you might say, oh, I'm not sure if that's the bittern. You can listen to that sound from your computer and it might turn out to be a cow. But when you look carefully at your spectrogram, the cow will have sounds, low sounds, middle sounds, higher sounds, higher sounds. It has a whole lot of repeating frequency sounds. So occasionally you might have to check that it's not a cow. Manually I can scan through an hour's recording in a minute to 5 minutes to see if there's any bitterns there. But it doesn't prove I didn't miss one. So, and that we'll do visually on our computers, or we may come up with a automatic scanning program that we can scan the hundreds and hundreds of hours of recordings that we're doing.
In addition to the Australasian bittern, the team is also looking to detect 2 other cryptic birds, Puveto, spotless crake, and Koitareke, marsh crake.
We're wanting to set up some sort of systematic monitoring of crakes. And crakes are tiny rails, actually distantly related to takahe and pukeko, but they're about the size of a sparrow, a little bit bigger than a sparrow, but not as big as a blackbird. And they live amongst the raupo reeds as well and feed on little insects that are in the mud. So to see one of those in a big area of wetland is almost impossible. But so far, while we've been putting out the bittern monitoring devices, several people have actually come across crakes as they've walked through the wetlands. And so we have quite a bit of anecdotal evidence now of crakes being present in various wetlands around Otago.
Last year, the team recorded bittern booms in locations around Otago.
We recorded a few booms at the Sinclair wetlands and at Lake Tuatitoto, which is just in from Balclutha, and down at the Catlins. And there were a few booms heard on a little wetland near Queenstown. And so we're monitoring those areas again to make sure that the bitterns, if they were there, are still there rather than they were just passing through. So we want to know if they're resident in the wetlands or not.
So this season is an exciting time for the team as they would understand more about the distribution of these secretive birds.
Last year we monitored less sites and across all those regions, but bittern booms were detected in all of them, which is exciting, and this year we've been able to increase it. And looking forward, I think there's probably an interest to do both more thorough monitoring at sites where birds are detected, but also increase our monitoring to other wetlands.
Well, I hope that we get some booms this season of breeding bittern. It would be awesome if we did. I guess the future is to know where they are and then go from there and what can we do to protect them. I guess if we know that they're breeding, maybe go and see if we can try and find nests of them and monitor them, which would be really cool to see.
We are very keen to just get reports of people saying they've seen a bittern. So what they're looking for is a heron that's a big browny buff bird with a longish stout neck and a stout bill and big wings flying slowly, flapping over the top of a raupo swamp. And then we'll follow it up.
You've been listening to Tune Into Nature with me, Karthik. If you have spotted an Australasian bittern, you can log these observations on citizen science platforms like eBird and iNaturalist. You can also email Birds New Zealand. Please check out the links in the description. We will be back with more great stories about wildlife and nature, so please follow the podcast on your favorite listening app. And while you're there, please leave a rating. That would really help. The podcast is kindly supported by the New Zealand Lottery Grants Environment and Heritage Fund, administered by Te Tari Tai Whenua, the Department of Internal Affairs. Supported by Professor Nancy Longnecker, Science Communication, University of Otago, ORFM Dunedin, and Wild Dunedin, New Zealand Festival of Nature. Thanks for listening.